Hi everyone, welcome to a Classic Panel Company restoration and recreation. This is the part of the business where we do our projects. Obviously we have the business side that does all the parts for the Classic Fords, classicpanelcompany.com. This side is the side where we do our projects. This in particular project is the Supervan replica we're building. Obviously the original one was built in the 1970s, early 1971 by Terry Drury and his team at Terry Drury Racing. Something I've looked at for a long time. He's trying to build a replica. Many people have thought about it. Some of us are only crazy enough to attempt it. Original idea was something similar to what they did with a big Ford powerful engine. Obviously to use the original Supervan body shell or identical one we've got here. So today I'm just going to take you through a few steps of the early stages. We wasn't managed to film some of the early developments we've done with the vehicle. Obviously we sat down with pen and paper when we first come up with the idea to build a replica of what you needed to be replica vehicle and something identical. Obviously you start with a MK1 transit body shell, which we managed to source a very good UK modelled vehicle. It was slightly different. It was a diesel fronted vehicle. Obviously we've actually changed lots of things, but the base there was for a good UK vehicle to start with, right hand drive. Some of the parts we can use, all the doors, the body shell, but literally like the original Supervan, it was only the body shell we used. Once we stripped the body shell, we then had to make a steel chassis, which we made a H-section chassis. We cut all the original chassis off the original van. We've made our own H-section chassis, which then take all the modern components. We wanted to use modern components because we do want to use this vehicle every day, and as much as we love the old vehicles and the simplicity, if you're using a vehicle every day, I must admit, some of the modern comforts we have outweigh the old ways of power steering, climate control, heated seats, luxuries we never had back in the 60s, 70s, and definitely not in the 80s. So it's a bit of a mix and match recreation. Obviously the outside we're going to try and get it as identical as we can to the original Supervan. The biggest challenge is the arches. Obviously there was one-off arches made, and I'm lucky enough to have some really good people that I know through my years of motorsport with autographs. One in particular is John Wright from JWRC Fabrications over in Lincolnshire. John's had more years than I can certainly remember, probably 35-40 years involved in motorsport, building cars from ground up, from bare chassis. Many front engine rear wheeled autograss cars, successful at national level, national champions. So John's got a vast array of knowledge, great bloke, really nice man, and I'm lucky enough to be a friend of John's who's willing to help me with this project. Even he thought it was a little bit crazy, but as we've built a friendship more and more over the last few years, I even think he gets the idea. So yeah, it's always a crazy idea to do something like a Supervan. It was back in the day, and it's even more crazy today. So before the van goes down to John's, which is hopefully very soon, there's quite a long list of people to thank. They've all had a bit of input, they've all done some work for me. I can't always do everything myself. I don't have a fully fledged workshop. We're more about building things once we've collected the parts, a lot of it, like the donor vehicle, we've managed to buy the donor vehicle complete, strip it ourselves, put all the parts on the shelves ready to measure and design a chassis to suit. So originally we bought the van, like I say, it was a UK model van, in fairly decent condition. Obviously you're looking at a vehicle that's from 1971, it's never going to be pristine when it's been parked up unless it's very expensive and had a full restoration. The next step was to design a chassis alongside what would take modern components. So the biggest choice for us was what modern car to use, with many problems with modern cars being the electrics, what they need to work, the components, and literally how would we create it. Obviously being the Ford Transit, I wanted to keep Ford parts used really. There is a couple of different parts and used, some parts that have been machined, but generally we stick to Ford as a brand. It's a Ford. I know it's certainly not a perfect replica of anything, but the mindset has always been Ford Transit, powerful engine. The original engine was a V8, as everybody knows, and it was in the back of the original Transit Supervan. One thing, we wanted to use the van as a daily user, so obviously with delivering parcels, delivering our panels throughout the country, we wanted to keep the load space free, as an original Transit was. So our decision was to put the engine in the front. Would we like to put a V8 in the front? Yes, it's just a big heavy lump, and we decided to go for the V6. So we've chosen the Ford Duratec V6, which is the AJ30 engine. Very powerful engine, it's compact, it's all aluminium, very light, very reliable. It's what comes in your Mondeo ST220s. Up to that, we've decided to go for an automatic gearbox due to the fact that the engine is pushed back. It's not quite mid-mounted, but the gear lever on a manual would be behind us. So that just made it easy to take the option for an automatic transmission. It's a cable, the gear lever can be positioned anywhere within the cab. So we've got the body shell of the Transit Mark 1, original Mark 1 Transit body shell. We've got our own fabricated chassis. One thing I would just like to say thank you to AD at JST up in Bury, who helped us and got the chassis straight on his flatbed, helped us set it up. So that's a big thanks to AD at JST. And then looking at the donor vehicle, a lot of the parts, literally the front end and the rear end, drop down in two cradles, which is the beauty of most modern cars. So literally we dropped the front cradle off the donor vehicle and it was just sat there, everything, engine, gearbox on the cradle. We've done the same at the back where you've got your drive shafts, your differential. It was all there in two separate cradles, which is why we choose the donor vehicle we did, because of that simplicity of two separate cradles with 99% of components bolting to it. So once we'd got the cradles on the floor, we then stripped the original Transit down to a bare shell, basically with all the doors removed, everything. We then decided to measure the wheelbase, what we wanted it. Obviously, the wheels had to sit within the original arches of the Transit. So the wheelbase is identical to the Mark 1 Transit. The width will obviously, we decided on the width once we know where the wheel arches sit. But once we got the wheel base right in length, we designed the chassis off that basically. As the original Supervan, our replica does sit a little bit higher than a normal Mark 1 Transit. This is due to the fact that it is built on a separate chassis with the prop shaft and everything going underneath. As much as we try to get it as low as we can, it does sit similar height due to that fact. At that point we come to a decision how to make the chassis, where to point everything, where to put everything, and then get it positioned. So we started with the chassis. It's a 5mm thick rectangle chassis. It's got strengtheners so far up the chassis from the rear end, 70-80% to the front. Obviously we can't put them too far up due to the engine position. The engine position itself is part of the manufactured cradle, which obviously keeps it all tied in together. So again, once we've got the chassis made, we could bolt the rear cradle on and the front cradle. The rear cradle was relatively easy because there is no suspension mounts that come off to the original body of the car. Everything bolted within that cradle. So the rear subframe to go on was relatively straightforward. It's 4 bolts and it takes everything. There's a couple of strengtheners we've put in extra due to the shape of the original car it come off, whereas this is just, as I say, a H-section chassis. The front's been slightly different. The engine gearbox dropped in on the cradle as it should. All the bottom arms, all the bottom geometry. The original steering rack, which again is a modern steering rack running power steering. The biggest problem we come across was the steering, because obviously on a modern vehicle, you're in a modern car, you sat behind the steering rack. It's probably below your feet if nobody knows. It's in front of your feet area on a car on the front cross member. Obviously in the van it's been very different, so we're sat on top of the steering rack, which literally means as you're at full length holding the steering wheel, your hands are in front of the steering rack position. So it's been a major task. We've had to design a steering column, you could say, to basically work out. We did think of the original Supervan, which literally went straight through the floor with the steering column, a bit like an old bus, but again, due to wanting to build it in a modern spec with modern internals and modern running gear, we had to think a bit outside the box. Regarding the steering, I will do a short separate video on that, because there's a couple of people to thank. Is an explanation, I can do the video and we can show you what we actually did. It's here. If you can't see on the pictures, this is it. It comes through the bulkhead and goes backwards, and at the moment that's all I'll tell you about it. It looks very simple, but believe me, it's took months and months, probably 12 months if not longer, from the thought process of how you actually create a steering column when you're already sat in front of the steering rack, to the process of having it made. But like I say, I'll talk about that in another video. The other big problem as well was where we go with the top arms. The top arms originally mounted to the body shell on the donor vehicle, so that gave us a problem of mounting it technically in fresh air. Obviously once you take away the body shell, it's the dimensions and how the arm works. It's so easy to get lost in, you know, trying to hang a piece of steel in mid-air. Lucky enough, we've done enough homework and enough measurements to get it somewhere near. You probably can't see the top arm, but it does actually mount to the chassis. At the moment, these temporary brackets, we were hoping they would be permanent, but one thing we've come across with obviously mounting it as a fixed point is we have no adjustments. We only have adjustment on the bottom arm for caster and camber. As again, you know yourselves, the more adjustment you've got, it's a totally different ball game. Once it goes for wheel alignment, if you've no adjustment, you know it's too far down the line to change. So last couple of days we've just been taking into consideration the pros and cons, and to be honest, the pros outweigh the cons. So we've just had some more bracketry made. So just on that note, a lot of our laser cut bracketry, one-off laser cut bracketry, small amounts, is done by a small business called 54 Metals. Lad Jonathan Hall up there is very good, very helpful. It's only a small business he does, it's mainly his weekend work. He's a very good engineer, very good at what he does, really nice guy to speak to. So if you think the big companies don't want to do your half a dozen brackets, they don't want you to do a couple of bits and pieces for your project, your road car, your hot rod, get in contact with Jonathan Hall. Like I say, it's 54 Metals. You'll find him on Facebook and Instagram. Really nice guy. You can send him cardboard cutouts, things that you want making. He even does some great fire pits if you are out for the summer camp. I will show you another thing Jonathan's made us. Not only does he do our laser cutting for the stronger bits, he's also done lots of 1mm, 1.5mm plates. There's a little egg in one of his videos, and that egg was for ourselves. We'll show you where that goes later. But getting back to the car, obviously, like I say, we had the top arm sorted, and then we had to work out the steering. So that's a bit of a rundown on the project van. Like I say, the body shell, the engine setup, gearbox, chassis is all been one-off made, as we say. What I'm going to do now, I'm just going to go around and show you a couple of the items we made. Steering box, the top arm setup with the long strut type arm, the brackets we've got on the front, and also the suspension. On the suspension note, we've had a big helping hand from Gaz Shocks, from Byron down there and his team. They've made us some one-off shockers, because the bottom half of the shocker is identical to what come off the donor vehicle, and the top mount is a universal mount, so we can mount it on our chassis with some of the brackets again Jonathan supplied at 54 Metals. So I'm just going to stop there and I'm going to take you around the vehicle.